In September 2015, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the 17 Sustainable Goals to address some of humanity's most pressing challenges for a better world by 2030. At its heart, they aim to eliminate poverty and hunger, address migration, battle climate change, reduce inequality, and increase access to education. Building on the principle of leaving no one behind, the new agenda advocates for a holistic approach to achieving sustainable development for all. The report hitting the targets, the case for ethical and empowering population policies to accelerate progress toward the SDGs, written by Nina Hatana and Alistair Curry, predicts that the majority of goals will be missed by 2030. One reason for that is our growing population, which serves as a critical barrier impeding progress toward the SDGs. With more humans inhabiting our planet, the more natural resources are consumed. And more of us also means we become vulnerable to threats like climate change, socioeconomic crisis, poverty, and inequality. This reality serves as a warning to humanity, a call to action before a positive change becomes impossible for humanity. These SDGs with the existing problems can affect inclusive and special education at multiple levels. At present, there are still learners with special educational needs that are stripped away of the opportunity to go to school because of discrimination, stigma, marginalization, and exclusion imposed by societies. In essence, all of these goals elicit implications for inclusive and special education. However, our objective is to establish a link with 5 of the SDGs that provide a comprehensive framework of inclusive and special education.
The first SDG is no poverty. Overpopulation can lead to extreme poverty, especially in lower middle income countries. Consequently, diverse individuals living in these adverse circumstances are marginalized and trapped in a born disadvantage to formal and inclusive education. In the Philippines, education poverty rates among the poor, which are 4 times the national average. Individuals, especially children living in dire poverty, are at risk of no formal education, child marriages, violence, exploitation, and abuse. In some instances, some regular schools that adhere to deeply rooted beliefs and selective inclusivity deny learners with these living conditions. This reasoning stems from the idea that children who experience poverty are difficult to manage, require more attention, and require additional financial assistance. Dedicated to reducing child poverty and providing equal opportunities for all children, the United Nations Children's Fund, also known as UNICEF, together with its partners, serves as a lifeline that helps those vulnerable and disadvantaged improve their access to education.
Next is SDG number 4, which is the quality education. Achieving inclusive and quality education for all reaffirms the belief that education is one of the most powerful vehicles for sustainable development. Education is indeed a basic human right, but there are still learners who are deprived of access to education due to differences in backgrounds and abilities. Moreover, the paper suggests that population growth cancels gains made in the goal's capacity. Nearly 240 million children with disabilities face challenges in getting access to basic needs including health and education. Also, in a broader scale, by April 2020, 1.6 billion children and youth were out of school primarily because of the pandemic. The crisis exacerbates pre-existing education disparities by reducing the opportunities for vulnerable children, those living in poor areas, girls, refugees, persons with disabilities, and displaced persons to continue their learning. Lastly, with its aim to eliminate all discriminations, the UN continues to partner with educational organizations to drop gender disparities in education, including persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, and children in vulnerable situations. With this, we envision a more inclusive and equitable quality education and learning opportunities for all by 2030.
Next is gender equality, which is SDG number 5. Gender inequality is one of the main drivers for high fertility rates. In countries with the greatest gender inequalities, Women are likely to have less autonomy over their bodily rights and therefore more likely to have unmet needs for contraception. This is one of the reasons why the United Nations is aiming for gender equality, which is to empower women and girls. Women and girls with disabilities experience double discrimination, which places them at higher risk of gender-based violence, sexual abuse, neglect, maltreatment, and exploitation. According to Rasul, disabled girls face many barriers in a quality education, and that frequently these barriers are greater than for boys with disabilities. In African countries, most girls with disabilities do not have the opportunity to access education and thrive in school. Now, the International Network of Women with Disabilities, supported by the UN, journeys to enable women with disabilities to share their knowledge and experience, enhance their capacity to speak up for their rights, empower themselves to bring about positive change and inclusion in their communities, and to promote their involvement in relevant politics at all levels.
Following is SDG number 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth. To achieve inclusive and sustainable economic growth, we must first achieve full employment and decent work for all women and men, including youth and people with disability. However, as the article implies, population growth can and does negate its benefits. In developing countries such as the Philippines, the middle class now accounts for more than 34% of total employment, a figure that nearly tripled between 1991 and 2015. Families with no decent and sustaining works cannot afford to send their children to school, thus limiting their chance of a brighter future. On a macro scale, a weaker economy will equate to a less likely social and education capacity. In addressing the issue, International Labour Organization, in line with the United Nations Development Assistance Framework, implements and supports various programs that promote opportunities for all to obtain decent work in which rights are protected, adequate income is generated, and sufficient social protection is provided.
And lastly, SDG 16, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions. The absence of economic growth and strong institutions, population growth contributes to conflicts related to scarce resources. The SDGs aim to significantly reduce all forms of violence and work with government, communities, and to end conflict and insecurity. Violence suffered by children is a violence of human rights. Children with disabilities are especially vulnerable to violence in school environment, which has a negative impact on their well-being and health. Children with disabilities in West Africa experience violence more than non-disabled children. In Ghana, disabled people are one of the largest oppressed groups. Traditional and religious beliefs and illiteracy stereotypes lead to the creation and reinforcement of repressive conceptualizations of disability. UNICEF works to end the multiple kinds of violence children face around the world by helping governments build stronger child protection systems and challenging existing norms related to violence, exploitation, and abuse.
The SDGs are a global effort towards a socially equitable and sustainable future where no one is left behind. This can be used to rebuild and revitalize the world in a resilient approach, focusing on creating good lives on a healthy planet for all people. Along with these advocacies and goals are learners who have been deprived, depleted, and neglected, who will serve as vital actors in this process. The inclusion of these learners will empower them to speak up and be involved. We urge policymakers to speak plainly and elevate the value of empowering and ethical population policies to achieve progress across all the SDGs. Post-2030, achieving a sustainable population should be embedded in the framework so that the SDGs will create a more sustainable, equitable, and a prosperous world where every child enjoys lifelong and quality learning.